Good evening. I know we're in a small, intimate setting, but I'm going to use the microphone because we're going to be recording tonight, and we want to make sure that for parents who don't have a chance to get here tonight, that they'll be able to have access to all of our discussion and everything that's going on. So just to sort of talk through a little bit what tonight is about, we know that about a month ago we hosted an information night about the master schedule. It was a lengthy night with a lot of details and a lot of information. And while we had a structure to be able to gather some questions at night and start to get through some of them, certainly an opportunity to have parents come in and really engage together in an open dialogue and an open question and answer session was something that clearly came out as an important need. So we created a series of different parent events. As I look around the room, some of you were actually here last night. We did a tabletop where we asked parents to work in small groups and to sort of roll up their sleeves and dig into some of the key aspects of the master schedule proposal, and to not only talk through the benefits, but certainly raise some of the questions and concerns that have been circulating and brewing, and even start together to brainstorm some solutions so that we can use this as an opportunity to get your feedback, to get your input, to extend that process a little bit more. As you know, last week I sent out an email talking about how we have been really thoughtful about what's been going on with the master schedule, the feedback that we've been getting, the good questions that have been coming up, and we've decided that we're going to be postponing for a year for implementation, and that's going to allow us to extend this process. So in that same email, I had talked about opportunities to keep parents in the community well informed along the way. So you're going to see in my weekly blast is going to be like a monthly section newsletter just about the master schedule with continual updates along the way, as well as subsequent events for parents to be able to engage in to continue to learn about the process. So as we've had a chance to go through a lot of the questions, one of the things that we've recognized is there tends to be four main areas of questions that have been coming up. One big area that we've been really focusing on is unit lunch. And I know that there's some really good and deep questions that have come up there. Another is around the idea of the actual hybrid block model in terms of the length of period for classes. That raises questions around things like professional development, and it also raises other questions. A third area that we've been hearing from parents and from students and teachers is around the IE period and what that will actually look like, the types of things that will happen, what that, how that can be built out, and what the process is going to be to develop that. And then finally, there's been a number of questions around the idea of one fewer period in our overall day or in our overall course offerings for students in terms of how many classes they can take. So currently, we offer up to 10 classes if a student opts out of lunch and maxes out every period in our current day. And in the model that's up on the board, there is a maximum of 9 slots where students can take classes. So while we have certainly seen a lot of questions that have already come up from parents and students and staff members, and we've had an opportunity to try to continue to build through maybe the FAQ document, we felt that really the best is just to turn this into a dialogue. So the way Matt and I want to structure tonight is to literally open up the floor. And we're going to be taking questions. We'll probably be piggybacking off the mic. One of us will pass over a mic as questions come up. The other one will start to answer. We'll take a mic back, and we'll continue to answer those questions. What we want to do is we want to try to structure the questions around each of those 4 topics as I laid them out so that we can kind of exhaust through each of those 4 topics in those areas. If for some reason, the structure doesn't seem to be working and there's questions that come up, we're certainly not trying to create parameters. We're trying to be able to help everyone kind of exhaust through and stay focused in certain areas. There was also a packet. It looks like most of you picked it up, just to give you some understanding of what's in there. The first page is the proposed model. So this is not a presentation tonight. I don't have a slideshow to go through, but we may have some resources that we'll bring up if we feel that they're important. So first and foremost, obviously, is the ability for you to look through the actual proposed model. The second page of that packet are I had talked about the key attributes that the scheduling committee had developed and had come up with when we were considering the idea of changing the master schedule. What do we value? What are the things that we value in our current model? What are the things that we're aspiring for in the future? So that's the list. You have it in front of you. We had also heard that it would be really helpful for people to be able to see actual samples of student schedules. So you have a sample of a 9th grader, a 10th grader, an 11th grader, and a 12th grade schedule. Those are actual student schedules. They were generated through the beta testing, and that was the result of what came out of it. So you can see how an actual student schedule, as compared to what they may have right now, would translate into the proposed model. And then finally, I know there's been some questions around professional development, what that could look like. There is a one-page, this is just strictly a sample of the type of a document that could show the different types of teaching strategies that would allow teachers to better prepare and teach into longer periods of time, specifically in our case, the 77-minute periods. So with that, we certainly want to open up the floor and allow questions to happen.
Thanks. Thank you for letting me go first as I requested. And the reason that I wanted to go first, and I was right and wanted to go first, this will take a minute, is because my question doesn't fall into any of your 4 categories, or else it falls into all 4 of the categories. And the question is this: before we get into all of this, and these are great questions, why are we even doing this? Why are we spending money? Why are we spending time to fix something that does not need to be fixed? I've never heard a single kid complain that our schedule is no good. There's no question that to create the IE period, some classroom time has to be cut. There'll be a reduction in classroom time. That's just numbers. That's a surety. And my real point, I just need to understand why we're even doing this. And I give one specific example, which is this. I know you were very excited when you made the presentation about telling how you had gone to other schools and that the individual lunches were great because all kinds of interactions and things were going on. I say that's really 180 degrees, the opposite of what happens at Irvington. And the reason is this. The schools that you went to were schools with 2,000 kids, with 4 middle schools, and who knows how many elementary schools. In Irvington, we have 1 elementary school and 1 middle school. And our small group of 130 kids are sick of each other by the time they get to 10th and 11th grade, quite frankly. And now you're going to throw them all into a room where they're going to be even sicker of each other. So I think it's really misguided, and I really would like to hear you talk about why we're even spending any time or money on something that, in my opinion, doesn't make sense.
So really the answer that I would give to that, David, and I want to stay really on the top side of that, like why? I think that's really ultimately the question. So through my time in Irvington, actually, I've had the opportunity to speak to teachers at length. I've had the opportunity to speak with parents, and certainly we've had the opportunity to speak with students. So like one of the things that we do is we have our core value awards every single month, and it provides Matt and myself an opportunity to meet with kids. And one of the things that we always do in those meetings is we ask, so what are the things that we do really well here in Irvington, and what are the things that we could do better? So there are certainly things that we hear from students that I think resonate for this master schedule. One is the overwhelming amount of workload that they experience. And that's not every single student, but it's a generality, but it's certainly a generality that we consistently hear. And part of that is how do they manage their days? How do they manage the amount of homework? How do they manage the workload? How do they manage the concept of going from class to class in 42-minute intervals? And it feels very much like a conveyor belt mentality for students along the way. We hosted the student focus groups a couple of years ago when we first started thinking our way through it. And as we started to talk about sort of our top-sided perception of what could be flawed in a very traditional model like we have, the feedback that we received from students in those focus groups was exactly that the idea of being able to create flexibility in our schedule, breaks in our day that are more consistent, and an opportunity potentially to see classes that don't necessarily meet every day, but could be spaced out, was something that the students thought could be really valuable in their approach to learning. The other side of that is our constant conversations with teachers. There are aspects of our current schedule that force us to pull students and teachers out of our classes at times, And it creates a grind, and it creates a loss of instruction. So while we could just take our 42 minutes and further reduce them down to create experiences like clubs, or to create experiences like assemblies, or to create experiences like a potential of an IE period, what we're then doing is we're really starting to truncate the amount of time that teachers have with students. And to go below 42 minutes, and we do have some of those days that exist now. We have them on PLRD days. We have them on shortened days like early release before holidays. The amount of time that a teacher has in class and what they can accomplish in 30 minutes or 35 minutes really starts to take away from an instructional model that can be valuable. So ultimately, it was through all of those steps that we felt that there was an opportunity for change. And as we extended that process and really started to develop the key elements, it's what led to us coming to this model. So.
And maybe I would just add one more element. You know, the other thing that we hear a lot from students in core value awards, we hear it whenever we talk to them, is that one of the things that they hope to have in their high school experience is a sense of spirit and community with each other. We feel like, yeah, it's true, David. They do form social groups when they're young, and they do, by and large, tend to travel in that same knot as they make their way through the 4 buildings. Students have shared with us, and teachers too, that they want to find a way for everyone to come together to have a common experience where they can share the same stories, the same laughs together, even though they might not socialize together outside of school. Finding a common place where they can have a shared experience and build a culture of positivity around the pride they feel about going to Irvington High School is something that they've been looking for. Teachers feel the same way. So elements like the IE period, elements like the unit lunch that can bring students into a less formal learning setting where they can be together and have shared learning experiences that are less orthodox in nature is something they're yearning for. And we see that positivity when we have our students coming out for the basketball game. Certainly when the girls' basketball team plays, you can see the fans' enthusiasm really resonates there. We want to see that same enthusiasm in our hallways, in our club meetings, in our classrooms. And we think elements like these help to build that sort of enthusiasm.
So to answer from a parent perspective, you heard the teachers and probably whatever they have. I think our traditional curriculum is designed for industrial times. We have moved on. The world is moving at 300 miles an hour. If we stay in our feed the child method, all of these kids who will be adults in 15 years will not know where to go. They wouldn't know what to do. These newer ideas are methods to solve problems and not tell the child become a doctor or an architect or an engineer. It's really no, it's interactions and teaching them to solve problems rather than going towards a college.
Hi. So, what evidence do we have in developing this program that that double-length periods are effective for high school age students, attention span wise?
So there certainly has been a lot of inspection around if there is an optimal amount of time. I think Dr. Reddick started to speak to it the night of our information meeting. We started to talk a little bit about it more last night. There's no research out there that says there's any one level of time that a class is optimal. I think really you start to look at what's right for your school. And in terms of whether it's 42 minutes, whether it's 77 minutes, I think the approach that we're really leaning towards, and a lot of sound educational research will say, is it's about how you train teachers into understanding how classes and how learning gets broken down. So the last sheet that we put into that packet, and I know this question has really come up in terms of like, how do we help prepare teachers to get to this point? So let me back up. I might be assuming something, but I know I've heard already from some students and some parents that in some cases they're experiencing classes that are already doing the types of chunking and breaking down of different activities in class that could make 77 minutes feel really, really important and valuable. In other classes, it may be a little bit more of direct instruction, a little bit more lecture style. And there are times where we can anticipate that what was 42 minutes, it may be tough to keep my attention span. If it's 77 minutes of the same thing, then that's going to be a grind. It could be really difficult. So part of the research isn't so much about whether it's optimal to have 42 minutes or 77 minutes. It's how you're then using that time, how we could be working with our teachers so that 77 minutes isn't 77 minutes of one thing. That there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. You could have a mini lesson for 15 minutes that follows up with an activity where students are asked to work in groups and each one is accountable for something different, and they're doing that for 20 minutes. And then there's share out to the class, and then students are asked to do a writing sample as individuals for 10 or 15 minutes. So it's not so much that the length of period determines what's optimal, it's what you do within to make sure that you're maintaining the cognitive focus throughout.
Thank you. It's my understanding that when we were first gathering information from students and parents over 2017, 2018, it led to a drop schedule, not the block drop, the hybrid schedule, but the actual drop schedule, and that the reason that we were not able to proceed on that was because of staffing issues, shared teachers and different campuses. I don't know if I'm totally right about this, but I think that's what it was. And I happened to be at a board meeting on the 18th of December, I believe it was, when Raina was giving her idealistic staffing requirements that she would love to see happen in the village, in this district. And she was mentioning how she really wanted to get rid of the part-time teachers, shared teachers, because she thought it was not such an attractive position for teachers, and we were losing teachers to other school districts because of this. And right away I thought about, hey, that sounds like a plan. Now, if all of that information that we gather from students, that I'm looking at this graphic that you produced in December 11th meeting, and it says, what are the things about the current master schedule that the students like? And it says there are many course options, the length of the classes are not too long. And I'm thinking, is it possible that we can think about right now that we're entering the budgetary period in the school district, and Raina actually think this is an ideal situation to try to get rid of our shared staffing and create full-time positions up at the campus so that we could actually have a drop schedule instead of a hybrid block? Or if you think the hybrid block is better than the actual drop schedule, if you could address that issue.
I think it's a great question. So, again, if we could go back in time a little bit, and Eric, I think you bring up some good points. So I would actually clarify that. What we came forward and we presented we were looking at two basic structures of how classes could be set up. A rotational drop was one, and a pure block was another. And they each have merits, and really we presented it that way. And I think that as we gathered feedback, we heard from some that thought that a drop schedule was something that felt like a preference that they would want to see move forward. And quite frankly, in other cases, we heard just as strongly that a block schedule was something that people felt could be really important. As we as a scheduling committee started to delve in, at no point did we say we absolutely positively want to have drop, and then the only reason why we didn't go that way is because shared staff wouldn't allow it to happen. There were certainly merits in the drop rotation that we saw. Quite frankly, in some ways, I think 50-minute periods creates a comfort because it's very similar to 42 minutes. So I think it lends itself to having some aspects that people found appealing. When we look at the block scheduling, 77 minutes I think creates other opportunities. They may be a little bit further out in the future, and it's something with vision that you can anticipate growing into and being prepared for. But I think the shared staff model was only one of the potential hurdles that we saw in the drop schedule. As we really started to explore more deeply, we felt that the block schedule provided us more with the flexibility that we were looking for in terms of being able to grow into a model and not just transition into a model. And also at the same time, we did recognize that while there might be certain elements of a 42-minute day that could be really appealing, if we go block, maybe we're sort of giving up everything. So as we started to explore through that more deeply, this idea of a hybrid model having both 42-minute periods and 77-minute periods really presented itself as the most ideal model for us. So what you bring up, Eric, is a completely fair point. I think that shared staff is certainly one limitation on why a drop schedule, as we looked at all of our models, had a limitation, but I also don't want to create the misnomer it's the only reason why we chose to look in other directions. We've also been exploring deeply. I don't know if it's practical and realistic to think that as a district we could completely move away from any and all shared staff. I think it's a good goal for us to try to reduce it. I think the challenges of shared staff go way beyond whether we go with a drop schedule or a block schedule or anything else like that. Just on a daily basis, we experience that grind, so I think it's a good thing for us to explore. But I don't know that it's automatically practical that it will completely go away. We've talked about that, and hence I don't know if it should become the backbone or the basis of picking what would be a schedule at the high school model.
And it did the model of drop schedule that we beta tested. Did that have an elimination of a period also? Or was it the full?
So we actually didn't beta test the drop schedule. We've only beta tested the actual model that we came to. So beta testing happened once we decided there was a model that we want to move forward with. But I think to answer the other part of your question, the drop schedule had two components, a morning and an afternoon. And it was a 4-day rotation where each of those days, one of the classes would drop in the morning, one of the classes would drop in the afternoon. So it would rotate through on a 4-day cycle. Yes. All of the models that we looked at were the same exact number of classes that we could offer. So ultimately a 9-period day versus a 10-period day or a number of classes. Well, we're going to use mics only because we're recording, so this way it allows everybody.
Hello. Okay. So my question is, I have a 6th grader and a 9th grader. So a lot of the texts I see and the conversations are, is today an A day? Is today a B day? So if I understand this correctly, it looks like there's a different schedule for 8 different days, right? So there's day 1 through day 8. So what I heard in one of your presentations was, we really want to reduce the stress of the kids. The kids are really strung out. They've got a lot to manage. So changing a schedule for 8 different days or having to remember an 8-day schedule intuitively feels like it would add stress if they are even sometimes tracking on, is Monday an A day or Monday a B day? Like I feel like I see a lot of correspondence or confusion about that. So I just have, if I understand this correctly, are there 8 different schedules?
So it's certainly more complicated than A or B day schedule, no question about it. But I think what it comes down to is making a series of structures within the building and in the lives of the students that support what is a more complex reality for them. I can tell you that day 1 of year 1, we will have students having a hard time finding where they're going. And I suspect that on day 4, that challenge will still be there. But I think within a week or 2, we will find ourselves in a routine. I know a lot of schools in our area, and even with younger students, have developed systems with more than 5-day or fewer than 5-day rotations, but more than just the 2. So speaking personally, I know my son's on a school district with a 7-day rotation. He's 10, and he is not particularly strong with executive functioning. He's very adorable, though. It's his mother, I assure you. But what I can tell you is when he came into the school, for sure, it was a challenge. It was a challenge for us, too. As parents, make sure he was ready every day, make sure his backpack was properly packed and he had the things he needed. But, you know, it didn't take very long before it became part of the culture, became part of our reality. I'll tell you something else, too. The school that he goes to and the school that we are looking to build has structures in place to remind kids. So there are signs in the main office, there are signs in the hallways that indicate what day it is, what's coming up. There are frequent blasts going home to remind what the following 5 days will entail. So, for example, I can foresee in a weekly blast from Dave, a weekly reminder that this coming week we're seeing days 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and this is a heads up for parents and students about what's coming. Yeah, it's more complex, but the kids are going to evolve into it. Our staff will too, and before you know it, it'll be part of the normal.
To add to that, one of the things that we've seen from some other schools that have put together some pretty comprehensive and complicated schedules is how you articulate it and how you educate students in the community, both in advance and as you transition into it. So One of the things that I think is nice about this proposed model is it has time built in to be able to support some of the added needs. So let me explain what that means. With IE being built into the program, I would envision that, especially in year one, but it probably would be something that we would be looking to do in every year. We would have a series of workshops that students can attend during the first month of school to sit with a counselor and or to sit with the support staff to help make sure that they're building out and going over their schedule. That we would have templates to be able to help them understand and to be able to not only just put it on paper for them, but to also talk through with them. How are you going to prepare for this? What kinds of subjects are you going to focus in on a nightly basis? How do you balance your way through the complexities of it? So, Matt speaks about, being able to announce what day today is, but I think it goes beyond just being able to have a central point for kids to remember today's an A day, today's a B day, or today's a C day as we potentially progress through. It's also, how do I anticipate that a few days in advance so that I'm preparing into that and getting ready for it.
And if I could just make one more clarifying point, the majority of our classes meet A and B day. So, for example, this class and this class are almost every single time the same class. So it's more complex on paper than it is in reality. And if you think about it that way, there are really only 4 different experiences. And again, the vast majority of experiences are the same every day. It's those days where you have those classes that are an A day or a B day class, a PE, health, a lab component that's somewhat complicated, but they navigate it now. They'll navigate it then too.
Sure.
I actually wouldn't take that too lightly, and I appreciate the fact that there's thought about support for students, but I do think that it would be helpful to think it through even further. So having a paper schedule, I think if we are looking to advance and to move forward, like what other digital supports that can be provided? I mean, we're a Google School. Could it be put in the calendars of the kids so they could easily pick it up on their phones? I do think it simplifies it when you look at it. But I agree, the A and the B can be confusing when you have your Monday off and what happens with the Tuesday and the planning for it. But what other supports can you digitally provide that will help students? And think it through. There's plenty of time to do it from now until then because kids, they all learn differently. So a paper schedule for one might not work as well as a digital schedule for another.
I mean, I'll just say I think that we agree that we want to take advantage of this time to make sure that we're building as many structures as we can to simplify those aspects of this new schedule that could be potentially challenging for any of our learners.
Is there a way to run a pilot with several students?
So, I think the idea of a pilot is a good question. I'm not sure that we would be able to pilot with a few students, only because that means that we would have a few students and or a few classes working under a completely different bell schedule throughout the day. But I think the point about running a pilot is a good one. I think that, and I've already had a chance to speak with the scheduling committee, and they're already brainstorming potential ways for us to pilot some aspects of this as we now have a year plus to be able to plan into it. So envisioning the ability to not only do some professional development with teachers around teaching into and teaching strategies that allow you to prepare for the block model, but using next year maybe to run some days where we have 77-minute periods, maybe 2 days in a row where we're modeling something like this and we're actually starting to get used to it. Opportunities where we can sample some elements of this so students get used to it. Obviously not fully implementing this model, but being able to pilot aspects of it so that we're better prepared, when we're ready to go full force.
I'm asking a question on behalf of a parent who couldn't be here tonight. Sure. This person said, I'm worried about the guidance department being able to handle the onslaught of questions with scheduling, class selection, etc., especially in the fall when seniors applying early decision or early action to colleges will need a tremendous amount of the guidance department's time to get their recommendations and grades into colleges by October. How will these same 4 people be able to manage 500 students with brand new schedules and any changes that will need to be made?
So I'll say there's two components to that. It's a good question. First and foremost, they're already doing that. So we already have a model where we have a tremendous amount of schedule changes that happen in the beginning of the year. That being said, I don't want to be naive. Obviously, anytime you have change, it potentially leads to the need for deeper analysis. So one of the things that we've been talking about is the ability to look ahead and to move up our scheduling process. So we've done that a little bit each year. I know that we've had a chance to release schedules in the last couple of years a little bit earlier in the beginning of the summer versus what had been very late in the summer prior to that. Eventually, I think it would be ideal for us to be able to release schedules sometime at the end of the school year so that it provides a window of time for counselors to be able to meet with students to start to address some of those needs up front, allow some of the summer planning to take place so that a lot of those changes happen before students actually walk into the building in September. There'll always be a need for some of those changes to happen in September. If we're thoughtful and we're able to get ahead of it, then I think it can speak into that exactly. And by the way, the counselors have raised that same question. They recognize the demands and the need to be present for seniors to start the school year, so it's something that we've been talking about in our conversations as well. Catherine.
Since the students will be having one less period in the day, it seems like it would be important to really maximize filling each class period with class and to avoid like unintended free periods that are created by not being able to, schedule a scheduling conflict or because the period is like health or PE that meets every other day. So would you consider offering those one semester classes, say like economics or women's studies, any one semester class that meets every day, instead make it a full year class meeting every other day opposite gym or a lab so that students can still maximize the number of classes that they can take?
So I think what you're talking about is flexibility, and by the way, it could even work in the other direction. Are there some classes that we offer right now in every other day models that could work better in half-year models? So what I really think I'm hearing you say, Catherine, is are there ways for us to better pair up our half-year classes, whether they're every other day or whether they're every day for half the year? And the answer to that is yes. We've been looking at that, and we certainly want to do that. Some of our classes make a lot of sense to run on every other day models. Phys Ed's the perfect example. Science Lab is another one. They don't operate effectively in true half-year models. At the same time, some of our classes need to or truly work best in first half of the year, second half of the year. You actually, if you run all of your half-year classes in every other day models, you're now increasing the amount of workload that a student has. So if I'm using, let's say, period 2 to take an economics class right now and a sociology class in the second half of the year, but now I run them in every other day models, that means I'm going to have aspects to keep up with sociology and economics at the same time all year long. It may not be every night, but I've just increased my workload for the entire year rather than pacing them out. So there's a reason why some are in different models, but the answer to your question is we can continue to be more thoughtful about how we're pairing up our classes and maximizing the opportunity to eliminate gaps in schedules. So one of the things we did in the beta, and I had mentioned it, but I think it's a perfect example here now, is we literally built the master schedule from the ground floor up. And when you do that and you use all conventional wisdom of how to build a master schedule, you start with your single versions of classes. I only have one section of something, so it has the most conflict. There's no other place for the kids who want that class to go. And if I put two classes up against one another that are singletons and I have a student who wants both, they can't have both. So when we had a chance as a beta committee to rebuild the master schedule, we felt that it was a more efficient system. Now with the pause, it allows us to have even more time to do that and to continue to work through that. Will it be perfect? Will it make sure that we eliminate every gap for every student? I don't want to create expectations that are not accurate, but I think we can continue to do a better job.
Hi. I know that you've landed on this block hybrid model after a lot of work, and a lot of the research on the block model is, well, controversial and contradictory. But one of the things that there is pretty good research about is the start time of school. And I'm wondering why we didn't consider giving the kids more sleep and starting later.
I think it's a fair question. At the end of the day, ultimately, it's really about where our school lies within the district model. So there are certain parameters, things like bus routes and how we do that really dictates a lot of our start and end time. So as we kind of went into it, we kind of realized the things that we were focused on and the things that we weren't. So unfortunately, start time was not something that we were focused on in our work. So.
Just a quick question. I have no doubt that our teachers and our staff will be with adequate training and proper time to prepare for this switch in schedule, will be able to handle these 77-minute classes. But has there any thought been given to the substitutes and how that works and the training of the substitutes? Because I worry a little bit about substitutes coming in even for an extended period if there's a sick leave on one of the teachers. And 77 minutes could be a long time for a sub.
So that's true. It's a good point. Well, it's a long time for anybody in that room if that time isn't adequately planned out. So we ask our teachers when they're out to provide plans that are detailed for the substitutes so that they can adequately try to replace the best ability, the learning experience that they're missing out on. There are times when teachers aren't able to provide that kind of detailed plan because things happen quickly and they don't always have the ability. And part of our work has to be making sure the teachers leave behind meaningful plans that can slide in to really any kind of a slot in the event of an emergency. So at the beginning of the school year, that means preparing lessons of 42-minute length and a 77-minute length that can go into like what amounts to a bank of experiences that they can deliver to subs in the event that there is an emergency that they can't predict. This is a challenge. This is a part of the work that we're going to need to make sure everybody's really trained for. We have been very fortunate to have substitutes in our building who are looking for opportunities to learn and grow as teachers. And I think that between that and the importance of training our teachers who are currently on staff to really leave behind plans that are meaningful and detailed, and the expectation that the subs carry those lesson plans out, I think between those two things, we cross that chasm.
And Des, let me add to that also. You bring up two distinctions. One is our day-to-day subs. The other is if someone's out for a long period of time. In the second case, we go through the same hiring process that we would if we were hiring someone to be a full-time teacher here. So, being able to teach into our model is something that we obviously would be looking for in our hiring process in a long-term model. To come back and add to what Matt's talking about, part of this is going to require a different level of thought and planning. And as teachers initially even think through their units, there's going to be a clear distinction between what is a 42-minute day and what is a 77-minute day for how they break down their units. If our teachers look at it as just a shift of time, in other words, how much of my information can I get in 77 minutes versus what I do on 42 minutes, and it's just a running stream, and we just think of it as pure, minutes on top of minutes, then we're going to be looking at that from a flawed perspective. So as Matt talks about working with our teachers and getting sub-plans in, it's also about sub-plans that work for 42-minute lessons and a different sub-plan that works for a 77-minute lesson. So there'll be moving parts to that. But as much as we can prepare our subs up front, really that's the training. The training is putting the plan in place for them that's going to work on those days that they're with us.
And just to illustrate that point with the chart for a second, I think it is really critical that teachers have a clear plan for what the difference is between a 42-minute experience and a 77-minute experience. If I'm teaching on day 3 in this 42-minute block, I need to have a plan for what this day is. It's only 2 blocks away. I need to know what this is going to look like. So really 6 days in advance, I need to know what this looks like. So anytime in the next 6 days, I should be able to tell somebody what this event is going to be with some clarity, because I only have it's only 1 block away.
I just want to go back to my general premise. You've discussed some of the benefits, but no one's talking about costs. Where's the money for Reddick? How much is it going to cost us in lost teacher time who have to waste their time learning this and redesigning their class plans that they've developed over 10 and 20 years of teaching? And now that they won't be able to spend time doing what they always do because they're going to have to learn this. Who decided that this is an effective use of resources? Because I think it isn't.
You know, David, I think the best way that I can answer that is, you know, the first thing that you look to do is you look to see if there's effective change that, you know, that you want to move forward with. Well, I think that we commit funds to professional development all the time. So, I mean, ultimately, you know, we're the ones who are committing to that. You know, I'm not sure how else to be able to answer that. Certainly, you know, both as a district and as a school, we identify where we think that there's appropriate needs to help train our teachers. And certainly there's been resources, you know, that we've put forward to this. I guess the deeper question is, you know, what's the right level of resource given whether change or whether it's, you know, current things that are in place.
Sort of a follow-up to that question. I mean, based on my first comment, you could say, this is hard. It took me a long time to wrap my head around it, but I see what everybody else has acknowledged, your thought, etc. And the effort that the community is putting into this. I think an additional element that we need to have is we want to be able to look back at this 10-year process and say, well, we are in a better place than where we were 10 years ago. And I think that's sort of going to answer some of the questions about where are we right now and what are we looking to go to, and can we look back? I agree that I don't want to come back in 5 years. Maybe the world has moved and we do need to come back, but if I do come back, I want to be able to say, we are in a better place. And I don't know what the right measure is, because I don't want to grade it by how many people went to college, because lots of people do, and that's not changing. How do the kids do in your standardized test? Well, we do very well. And yeah, we moved from 90 to 92. Yeah, we do. So that's not the right thing. I think you need to take your values and get the feed in from whatever you already have, the data, the baseline data that you have. And, you know, this is probably an added element of we are going to have the research to say this works, or at least it worked for us.
Thank you. And, you know, I know that came up last night at the tabletop, and, you know, it's a question that we've seen come behind the scenes, which is, you know, how do we evaluate this? And I think, Vida, you brought up some really great points last night and have shared, you know, in order to set the parameters with which we will evaluate, we also need some measures around where we currently stand, so there's a baseline to be able to compare that to as we move forward. So certainly part of what we need to develop.
So I think I'm building off of a question that was asked earlier, in that if we're talking about sort of, I guess I'm probably here more to represent the kids in terms of some of the things I hear as I'm driving around the carpool. And two of the big things that sort of were the recurring themes were, what do you mean we're all going to eat lunch together? And 77-minute periods? It's horrible. So are those two places that we could pilot? Because I feel like having everyone in a lunchroom at the same time, let the staff feel what that feels like. Let the kids feel like what that feels like, so that we can see by 2020 that here are the things that we need to correct versus like trying it out in 2020. And the same thing, you know, as it relates to 77-minute periods, I do a lot with Gen Z, so I know from a digital perspective, the world is moving to this shorter form content. So 6-second videos, like if anyone knows what those are, that's where the kids are being exposed. So to whoever's, you guys talked a lot about this, I think it's so important when we talk about the 77-minute periods that they have to be formatted differently, because these kids are learning in shorter, we call it snackable, we call it short form content, this is what we're training them from I guess a digital perspective, and that's what their life is going to be like. They're not going to be watching, reading long form articles and sitting in 4-hour movies anymore. That's going to be really hard for them. So I guess, can we pilot those things is really the nuts and bolts of the question.
So those are good questions, and it actually came up at the tabletop a few times last night too. I think there are elements, for example, about the lunch that are eminently pilotable in next year's time. So potentially we can get some of the furniture in place. I don't know if you've seen it when you came in, but there are some maps here about some drafts of where we might add additional furniture for seating. These are things we might be able to put in place next year and try that out. I think we could also talk about the opportunity to have Aramark start to pilot some of the ideas with their stations that they have suggested they can do. And those are things that we'd want to make our students comfortable with while there are still multiple class periods. So while there are still multiple lunch periods, they can determine their ideal eating locations, their ideal purchasing locations, get those things as a part of their routine prior to having the unit lunch go in place. And I think developing those new aspects of our culture will be critical, and I think it's one of the reasons why we feel good about taking the year to pause.
So Matt kind of spoke into it, and I just want to reiterate it so it makes sense. So this is strictly a draft. This is not a final product, but one of the things that we've been hearing about, and certainly valid questions around, is where will students eat lunch? So the idea of anticipating the entire school going into the cafeteria obviously creates a whole host of problems, and that isn't the plan. So the idea is, so where could they go? I know during the presentation we started to lay it out up on the screen, and if you want later on, we have these posters up here. Again, this is strictly a draft, but we've started to anticipate areas throughout campus where we can provide more seating. So for instance, this here represents spaces in our science wing on both second and third floor. There are little alcoves across the way from our classes up against the glass walls that face over into the quad, that each has spaces where we could put tables and we can create seating. We have space over here outside the library, between the library and the Mar Gym, where we have a hallway where we could have tables, we could have seating. If you envision more of a college campus in kind of a spread out way where kids can really use the campus as lounge and be able to create those spaces, it's not necessarily trying to create one singular event for all students to have to experience during lunch. The other question, and Matt was alluding to it, is, so how do students get access to their food? If they have to go into the cafeteria to get food to then come back out and experience these spaces around campus that we've set up, that feels like another flawed model. So the idea of being able to create satellite stations, we spoke at length last night. So there was a model a couple of years ago where Aramark was allowing students to pre-order their sandwiches. There was some flaws in their system. They're not doing it now because what they found was they were getting students to pre-order sandwiches, but students weren't necessarily picking them up. So if we had a system that was tied in with our payment system where students are ordering and paying, and then we were able to make those sandwiches in advance, create, let's say, a satellite station in our atrium where students can then grab and go and take their sandwich that they've ordered, that they've selected. There could be a really efficient way to do it. It's those kinds of thoughts and ideas that we need to expand upon. Again, by no means do we want to suggest to you that we've created all of those things and that's what this model is, but this is merely a draft to be able to give you some context and some understanding of the thinking that we have and the work that we're going to be able to do with Aramark to make that happen.
I can also tell you with some certainty that a lot of the locations that we've earmarked for new furniture are places where students are already eating. So those science floor alcoves, I can tell you because I'm very often over there reminding them to treat that area like their home, is very often a place where kids are congregating. They socialize there, they eat there, and now it's a place where we can get some furniture. We can remove the distraction that they pose to the classes that are in that hallway because no class will be going on at that time. And it's a really nice place to eat. Lovely view of what used to be a bridge. So I think that, I know Dave sort of talked about it a few minutes ago. I think that what we'd want to do that during next year, after we've had a chance to train teachers in this and develop some comfort with it, sprinkle a few double period days throughout the calendar, plan them way in advance, let people know they're coming, let students know they're coming, and let teachers know they're coming so they can start to try out the strategies that they've been working on in theory.
I have a couple of questions about that. One of the points that you had made about a unit lunch is that it's a chance for all of the kids to be together. And it seems to me as if you're splitting them all up around the campus and losing the benefit of a unit lunch. And the second question that I have is, are you still going to focus, or is Aramark still going to focus on providing healthy lunches? I think I had seen somewhere written vending machine food, and I thought the school was trying to get away from vending machine food and provide healthier lunches throughout, the year.
So those are great questions. A couple of things. When we say unit lunch can promote the ability for students to have lunch together, the intention isn't necessarily that you have one large space and everyone is in a singular room together. To understand that they're teenagers, that they're at the same time that they can be together, that doesn't mean that they're together as 525 students in a circle, and I use that only as a metaphor. I think the idea is that if the entire school community, teachers and students alike, are taking a break simultaneously to have lunch, there's a togetherness factor to that. And there is an opportunity for students to be able to have more social aspect together, more mentor-mentee relationship with our faculty, and more opportunities to collectively experience that lunch. It's sort of like the idea of everyone breaks bread together, not physically, but metaphorically at the same time. So the idea of spreading out space throughout campus, I don't think detracts from the unit lunch model. I think it also speaks into the practicality of how does that work. So in any and all schools that we have visited or spoken to, there's certainly an element of entire campus needing to be spaces for students to be able to eat in order for that to work. As far as healthy lunches, by all means, we are absolutely part of the Healthy Lunch program and will continue to be that way. I think it's hard for us to get our heads around vending machines as opportunities, and by the way, that may or may not work. By vending machines, I don't mean what we often perceive as vending machines where you get a cup of soup or a cup of coffee and things that have been sitting in a machine potentially for days, and it feels unsanitary or unhealthy. I'm talking about machines where literally made-to-order items or items that were made that day could be loaded. So a sandwich, a turkey sandwich, a specific version of a turkey sandwich is made that day and put into a cold vending machine. That may not be a good model for us. It's one that Aramark does, and it operates well in some schools. But again, I think we would have to explore any and all ways to be able to spread out the opportunities for students to get access to food. If that could work, great. If it feels off and it's not going to work, then it's certainly not one that we should go forward with.
I know that one of the concerns that a lot of teachers and the kids have is that by taking away one of their electives, they're going to lose classes. I mean, the math of it is that there's going to be less places for the kids to go. And I'm wondering if you've really, I brought this up before, run gym in ninth period opposite orchestra, so that frees up time. But have you put any thought into making the ninth period more of a real full period that isn't just music and Latin, I think is all that runs in it right now?
Thanks, Stacey. So currently, yes, you're right. We only run a single section of Latin 1, and ninth period is essentially a music-only period. We have roughly 60% of our students take music classes. So there's a reason why we have that exclusivity for music at the end of the day, and I think that there is some component of it that's important. We've seen a number of schools that have their music classes built into their school day, and what that then happens is you get a lot of students that might otherwise pursue music, but now they're making the choice between giving something up. So I think we have to look long and hard at that. So is there an opportunity for us to put more classes into ninth period? I think there could be. My first instinct on that is to consider classes where students wouldn't be competing against their music classes. So we made a decision a couple of years ago to put that single section of Latin 1. There may be other decisions like that. It could be a phys ed class. It could be something like that that could help us further expand the day and expand those opportunities, and I think it would be wise for us to look at it. But I'd be hesitant to put too many things opposite music, because I think there's something that we value there as well. So, you know, there could be a better balance that we can strike. Sure. I definitely think it's worth exploring. You know, I have some pause. When you create those opportunities, you will also naturally have some students that take music that will see an opportunity to do something else, and that might be right for them. But overall, the same way that we want to keep the integrity of all of our programs intact, I just think that, you know, that's one also that comes to light for me.
Well, and sort of in line with that is I'm still having issues with removing an elective. I can tell you my son is freaking out about this and really, really hates that, especially and he admittedly is one of the people who skips lunches. So he goes on there and goes and has band as well. So, but my concern is what will happen, and you mentioned earlier about the kids who need the free time and they need the spacing. What about the kids who want to be and can handle it? I know, admittedly, I know not everybody can handle it, but at this point, luckily, my kid is. But what about the kids who can handle it and want more? And those lunch periods and the IE period is now taking away time from other opportunities for them to say, what else do I want to do? What else do I want to be? And their electives are the way of doing that. And the other line with that is you're now taking away one elective from every single kid in all 4 grades. How is that going to impact, I mean, potentially, how is that going to impact the programs that you're going to be able to provide if you're taking away all of these the number of classes that you're going to lose? How can you support the staff going forward in other programs where you're not going to potentially now lose classes, and therefore, why do you need, if you're not going to be teaching classes, why do you need that staff? Why do you need those programs?
So let me start with your last question. I'll work my way back to your first question. Please keep in mind that the great majority of our students have lunch. So for every student that currently has a lunch in their schedule, and for every student that currently has 2 half-class periods free in their schedule, there is absolutely no difference between our current model and the proposed model when it comes to how many classes they'll have in their overall workload. So again, for every student that currently takes a lunch, and for every student that currently has at least 2 half periods free in their schedule, that means that they're maxing out right now at 9 classes at most, and they'll still have the same number of classes to be able to have. So the idea that every student in every grade level will be reducing one period or one elective is really an extreme and not the system that we operated. And I don't mean it to combat. I mean it because I think it's important that we ground ourselves that way. And again, not necessary for an apology. I just want to make sure, because some of this then comes back to some of the philosophies. So listen, I recognize that we have some extraordinary students in our school, and we have some extraordinary students in our school that can take a great deal of coursework. Some of this starts to raise questions about what is the right norm for us to have. And in our current model, as I had mentioned, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but when colleges look at our students, the norm that they look at is how our students compare to one another. And when we create a structure by which we have students that are taking 10 classes in our day, whether it's intended or not, that becomes the norm and the expectation with how colleges look. So if college is looking at 2 students and making a decision, and they're similar in terms of their performance levels, but one student has chosen to put pauses in their day and therefore has a transcript where they're not showing as many courses that they've taken, versus a student who's skipped out on lunch all the time and done a great job, maybe those same grades, it starts to create an expectation. And when we think of that culturally for our entire student body, some of this comes down to philosophies, and the philosophies that we believe in terms of the importance of lunch as a community. And I think you bring up great points. And I don't want to just gloss over it. I understand that. If I felt that we were doing it by putting kids in harm's way, I would have great concern. I know that our research shows that having 9 periods that students can take classes is still at one of the upper stratospheres of where high schools are out throughout our country. I don't think it puts students at any disadvantage. And then it brings up finally another great point. How can students use other times in their day, whether it's IE or lunch, to explore their passions, their desires, their ability to learn? It may not be through coursework, but that doesn't mean that it's still not learning. It doesn't mean that they're not getting mentoring from a teacher. It doesn't mean that while it may not show up on a transcript, it doesn't mean that a child can't speak about it in their college essay or still have it documented in some way to say, I advanced my learning because I had spaces in my schedule to address it.
I went to the National Destination Imagination event, or it's called like the Universal Destination Imagination, because I guess the universe is there. And I saw, aside from our elementary kids, we went to the high school events, and from the time we came back, we are telling our high schooler, can you put this together? That's what your kid needs to do, is to take a big problem and solve it. That's what destination imaginators do. And those are the kind of things that ought to come into our school. We already have it at elementary. Yeah, those are the kids who are coming up. They are
Welcome to my world. Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to try to keep us centered on this. Allison, you have a question?
Thanks. Yeah, well, I do have a question. So while they're going to have more breaks, which is what we're discussing right now, in that IE period, there's the opportunity for club time, right? Or is that's when the clubs would happen? So theoretically, like right now, I find that my daughter has to kind of pick, like she signed up for 2 clubs, but she doesn't really do one of them because she can only go to one club meeting when there's club day. And theoretically, because it's a longer period, maybe the clubs would be structured a little differently where there'd be multiple club opportunities or other types of extracurricular interests that kids could pursue during the day, that while they're not technically classes, they're still learning and developing and enriching themselves as a student. Is my understanding correct about that?
Totally. So just to sort of back up, our current model has club period twice a month at the end of the day on Tuesdays for 25 minutes. Quite honestly, it's too short. If I started in a space and truly had 25 minutes, I might be able to engage in some meaningful club experience. But when you anticipate transition times, when you anticipate the social factors at the very end of the day, and when you put all of it into place, quite frankly, the feedback that we get from our students is, while it sounds great on paper, they're rarely using that time to engage in clubs. And then when you put on top of that the desire to participate in multiple clubs, so at best we offer twice a month. In our IE schedule, we would be offering IE period at least 7 times per month. Often it would be 8, 9, or 10 times per month. It would greatly increase the amount of club opportunities they have. But this starts to give an example of how that lays itself out. This is strictly a model. This is not the way it would be. We would have to develop this. But clubs would rotate. So this is on 4 days of IE. You could see that on this first day, there's Model UN, there's Academic Challenge, there's Positive Impact Club, there's an ability for students to be able to go in the library to do independent work, or to do National Honor Society peer tutoring, get help from peers. There are teachers that could be with office hours that day. And likewise, on other days, we have the ability for them to rotate through. So the amount of experience they have with clubs would be vast. So yes, possibly they could do more than one club on a given IE day. More importantly, I think that they will be able to do multiple clubs across IE days. In addition to that, we have found that it's been a little bit of a grind to run a consistent assembly program, because every time we run assembly, once again, we truncate our period. So we start with 42 minutes. In order to make assembly happen, we start to reduce our period length. So on assembly days, we're running our periods at roughly 35 minutes per class. Again, with transitions, it starts to be, it's taking away from instruction time. It's taking away from the types of richer learning experience that can happen. So within an IE set schedule, we can build in set IE periods that will be designated for assembly. We can have a consistent and set assembly program. And this is most certainly an area where students can advance and enrich their learning. One of the clubs I think of right now that's student-led is, and it was through an Innovation Fund grant, is we have a robotics club. And they literally just got delivered the components to be able to build a robot to go compete in a robotics competition. So again, they're not going to get course credit for that, but I would imagine that's a pretty deep and rich learning opportunity for students to engage in.
Oh, can I just finish? I'm sorry, because I
Sure.
had like two parts, which I appreciate your answer to the first part. But so for the majority of the kids, which I don't know what the percentage is, that currently have lunch, you're saying nothing's really going to change in terms of what is available to them from a course level. And then for the percentage of kids that currently don't have lunch, they're going to have this unit lunch. But so currently now, those kids start at 7:50 and go till maybe 3:20 without any break at all. Is that?
That's true.
So, okay. I mean, I guess it's just sort of a philosophical discussion, which is kind of what you're saying about, is that what we deem as healthy? Like, for, like, it wouldn't, I know I would not function well that way, but I guess there definitely are people that do.
Thank you.
To add to that, I was wondering, I'm looking and I don't see, does Irvington High School or Irvington School District have a mission statement as such? I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot. I was just wondering if we do or don't. We do. Okay. Did the mission statement change at all based on, like, it seems to me that there is some kind of philosophical shift, and I'm wondering if our mission statement changed and if this is aligning to the mission statement. I'm wondering if the mission statement exists and has it changed, and is this new schedule part of the change?
So I started in District 6 years ago. I know one of the first things that I was a part of as a new administrator here was our summer retreat, where we developed our theories of action. And in the theories of action, they talk about developing and advancing our learners for 21st century learning methodologies and skills, talking about learners through lenses like being risk takers and problem solvers, empathetic learners. So from that standpoint, I would say yes, that was the beginning of us sort of regrounding our beliefs educationally as a district. Catherine talked about the strategic plan that took place and how that sort of rounded out our theories of action and put it into a plan. So through that lens, I would say absolutely. I think that this model very much supports that and supports what we're looking to see our students develop into as learners and how they can be prepared for their post-secondary careers.
This is a question that comes from a parent who couldn't be here tonight, so I'm going to ask on her behalf. So she wanted to know, what are the short and long-term anticipated budget implications for professional learning, time and money, and instructional resources for making the shift from to block scheduling? And I actually have that question as well, so I guess that.
I mean, I don't have that in front of me as a dollar amount. In some ways, I would turn to my colleagues in the back of the room if there's any more comprehensive way to answer that. I know that we've certainly, Dr. Reddick was with us, and we engaged him 2 years ago for, I think it was a series of 4 or 5 days of professional learning with our scheduling committee. And since that time, we've done some school visits, which had some minor implications of cost. This year, obviously, Dr. Reddick joined us for the presentation to the parents. And as very good questions have come up, there's certainly a need to be able to train and support our teachers moving forward. So certainly we'll be anticipating costs for that. I know I heard Dr. Harrison talk last night about the furniture and some of the cost factors here. So I can tell you that we already have money that had been set aside, so there's no new budget or new ask that we'd be asking of the community to be able to support this. And part of the way food service works is that when students actually eat school-based lunches, there are some monies that come back from the state. So if we can create better opportunities and more opportunities for students to actually eat school-based lunch, there could be monies that come back at a greater level than we currently see. So there's some of that that can help move forward into supporting some of these plans for unit lunch.
I think underlying, it seems like from what the goals were for making this change, an underlying theme is stress reduction and wellness for the students. At the same time, the focus group that was held a couple years ago, most of those students are gone. They've graduated. I'm sort of putting out there as a request, and it would actually, I think, be something that would make our district truly embrace a dialogue and a openness to its student community that's being affected. I'm wondering if we could have a true, and this could go into some sort of long-term measurement, a true survey of the students right now on various levels of stress and wellness and things that they like and things that they don't like, and ask questions that maybe we don't want the answers to because they don't go with this, but now is the time, because we have a pause, to ask questions what really goes into their feelings about being heard in the community and their true stress level, because I can tell you as a parent, they're not telling you guys how they truly feel. And I've heard this from many teenagers who are upperclassmen. They go to school and they say, for the most part, they tell their teachers what the teachers want to hear because that's just the easiest course to get through things. So I'm just requesting that maybe there's some way to have a true survey. And it could be a starting out point, so when we go down the line with whatever model we do and any changes and tweaks, then we can say, oh, in 5 years, our levels of this were X, Y, or Z, and in 10 years, kind of going off on what you were saying. So I'm just putting that out there. It's not really a question, but just kind of a request if we can possibly do something.
I think it's a really good idea.
I have a couple things to say about schedules and electives. This pause, I would hope, would then give us a chance to possibly take the schedules from September of 2019 in the traditional scheduling format and be able to run the beta test of those into this schedule and see what the actual changes, what we're actually possibly losing for whatever students. And then to touch on another point about electives, because I mean, even if we get the kids to buy into the lunch, the unit lunch, and the 77-minute periods, I know which were two key concerns, the fact is that you guys, the administration, you're making decisions for the children, our children, and the parents in the community, stakeholders. You're telling us that we can take one less elective, possibly, in the school day. And even if we don't see that from a demand point of view, even if every single kid gets beta tested this fall and they get to have the exact same schedule in the different format for 2020, there will be less actual units of electives available taken next year, because there will be kids who do not get to take everything they want to do, the kids who max out their schedules. And this is a discoverable number. You know what I mean? Though right now you could say that there's X amount of units of electives for, say, if we have 590, 600 students in the school, in the high school, and there's, I don't know how many others, like 1,500 elective units that are used. You can see how many are possible in the new schedule and what percentage of electives we're losing. So if we're losing, say, 15% of electives, it's going to affect the actual supply of electives that are available in the future. And what is that going to do to the numbers that we have, the minimal numbers in classes that are electives in the future? And will that affect the offerings of electives in the future? It's not going to necessarily affect the kids, you know, the kids who are in high school now, or the kids who are going to be in high school next year. It's going to affect the kids who are in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade right now. And I'm really worried about the administration making decisions as to what courses they think are valuable when that doesn't necessarily align with what stakeholders feel. And I would particularly point to the arts here, where I think, you know, we can say that we love Latin, we love Greek, whatever, and that's fine, and I agree with that. But there are kids whose Latin and Greek thing that they go on that makes them special is in the arts. And I don't want to see things marginalized just because you're only going to have, say, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids in the advanced class of art, and you're not going to have 12 now because, you know, people aren't going to have as many electives available. And I want to see a commitment from the administration to recognize the fact that the actions that you're taking with the new schedule are completely going to affect those numbers. Because I've seen it already, just in the time that I've been in the school district, with the writing class and how it's pushed Latin out to that last period. And yes, we've made it available to all the kids that had it before the mandatory freshman writing class. But that is also playing into your reasoning to change the schedule right now. So I think we have to, I would like to see from the administration some sort of acknowledgement of the mandatory classes that are required from Irvington, not from New York State, obviously, because there's no choice over that, but that the administration requires from the kids. If we can be very flexible on that, because you're asking everyone else to be flexible, and that probably, the elective issue is probably the #1 concern of the kids that you'll see. And I think it would go a long way to show that the administration can be flexible also. And maybe we take a new look at what the administration sees as a mandatory class, because you actually are eliminating elective for some of the kids in the district.
I think that feels like, you know, a recommendation. My speaking into that, Eric, is that, you know, I think you bring up good points. I think the same way that you talk about beta testing for next year is exactly the type of beta testing we already did. I know I mentioned it last night. One of the things that a beta test produces is a master schedule. A master schedule is not something that we typically release in terms of our numbers of enrollment for every class and every section of every period. But I think that the need that has certainly come up for a way for us to figure out how to be able to present the information and the data around the master schedule so it becomes tangible. So it's easy for me to stand here and to say, through our beta testing, we did not have any reduction in any of the course offerings that we had in the proposed model versus what we currently offer this year in the overall model. Some of the classes might have seen some slight reduction in enrollment because of students that maximize 10 periods in their day. But overall, part of the commitment I think that you speak of, Eric, is the commitment that we have to say we are not looking to reduce the number of courses or the number of electives that we offer. You see on the list of key attributes, it is something that we value greatly. I mean, quite honestly, since I came into this district and into Irvington High School, we've seen an expansion in the number of electives and course offerings that we provide. So the last thing that we want to do is create a model that's going to go against that very important philosophy that we believe in for our kids. I think the pause does another thing that you just mentioned. It gives us another year of beta testing, and I think just as importantly is a way for us to be able to identify ways to make that information transparent so that it makes sense, it's tangible. It's one thing for me to have looked at it and to say it makes sense to me. It's another thing for me to, at a time of great change and at potentially great risk for you and your children around what those decisions mean, for me to just say, well, trust me on it. I took a look at the beta testing and all works out fine. So I know that I need to figure out a way to make that meaningful for all of you. And finally, in terms of flexibility, I think we need to exhaust what we feel are the right levels of flexibility that we can have in how we ask students to go through courses. Obviously, it's always comes back to what do we believe in, what do we feel is critical, what do we feel are essential baselines that we want for all students, where do we still believe in that versus where is there flexibility, and I think that, you know, going to a new model opens up the doors for a lot of different thinking. So thank you.
This is actually a question and information from my daughter.
Okay.
She had wanted me to share it, and it actually also gets right into what both Eric and Kira had said about electives and stress. One of the things that she feels very strongly about is that she's one of these kids that takes, you know, maximizes her schedule.
Mm-hmm.
She also feels a lot of stress to know what it is that she wants to do. And it's certainly not coming from the family. I think it's coming from the school. It's been coming from guidance since she was much younger in my middle schooler now, that she needs to really focus in on what she is interested in and what she wants to do so that when she applies to college, she's showing very specific skills. Her way of doing this is by taking multiple electives. So she's taking architecture and she's taking photography and she wants to take different, you know, robotics. There's so many things that she wants to take because she feels pressure to know what she wants to do. And I'm not sure how the stress from that is going to be translated to not being able to take the number of electives that she'd like to, and then having even less of an idea of what she wants to do, not being able to explore different options. I am also, though, a firm believer in every student having a lunch. I see it being very detrimental to her not having a lunch, even though she doesn't really understand that or get that. So within the new schedule, how are you going to help the kids understand that this is a way to reduce their stress and that they might not need to take 3 or 4 electives in a year? And how are, I guess then my question is, how is this going to be translated to guidance and teachers that maybe the kids aren't going to know what they want to do because they don't have opportunities to learn what they want to do? Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense. Yes. So let me see if I can respond to it. It's a lot.
One thought.
You know, and I don't know that I don't know that I can provide you with the right answer. There's a lot of layers of learning that people need to go through in order to make change effective. So you bring up a lot of layers. One is, how are we going to work with our students around how they understand the new schedule, how it makes sense to them, how do they see it as valuable, how do they, you know, right now they see it as change. And if they feel that the classes that they take are really important to them, and if they automatically perceive it as, I'm going to have a lesser experience than I currently have, then it would be very natural and normal for them to experience an added level of stress. So the opportunities from everything from assemblies to individual counseling sessions to be able to talk through what their schedule can look like. As we're here tonight, and Eric talks about the ability to beta test next year as well, the ability potentially to have students see the before and the after of their schedule could possibly be something that might be really valuable for them if it leads to a need to change from 10 periods to 9 periods. The ability for them to have some thought and some thinking around that could be really valuable. The other side of that is we clearly have talked tonight and have continued to talk about training that we need to do with our teachers to be able to anticipate different teaching strategies in the new model, but to make sure that we're grounding our counselors and understanding what it means to have you know, one fewer period in the day for students. How are they talking to students about the decisions that they make? How do they help them feel both well-rounded and to be able to explore opportunities versus the ability to be strategic if it makes sense for that child is going to be important. Again, I think I used this phrase earlier tonight. By the way, those conversations are already happening and students are already making those decisions in our current model. I've worked with parents and with students who have just been faced with the decision of, should I have lunch this year or shouldn't I? And we've certainly been trying to encourage it more often than not to take the lunch based on the philosophy that we even come forward into this schedule with. And students then make those decisions. Students make those decisions every year because, quite frankly, they're not always able to get the courses that they ask for. Sometimes the ability to take that AP Calculus BC class, as well as the physics, as well as the AP language class, just doesn't fit into their schedule. So they're forced to make decisions. I know this firsthand because I've taken on the excitement of working with students, and sometimes they're tough conversations each and every summer now, if there's summer work involved, to help students make those decisions. I've been the one working with them through email, through phone calls, to help them make those decisions and get those changes done ahead of the start of the school year. So some of those things already take place, and the ability to help understand what it's going to look like in this format is something that we absolutely have to give further consideration to and support everyone involved to be able to be as successful as possible.
I have one point. I think that if our schedule offered 12 periods a day, we would have students who opted to take 12 periods a day. I think if we offered 14 or 17 or 34 periods a day, we'd have students who signed up for that. And I think part of the work that we want to do here is help our students understand as they grow to be young men and young women that as, not just as learners, but as humans, they have certain needs in their day to keep them healthy. We want to train them to make good choices for their college lives and their professional lives, their social lives, to make time in their day for themselves, to make sure that they are getting a chance to breathe and take care of their physical and emotional health. I think this is how we coach them to do that. So I think the question that you're raising is a really, really good one, and I think the work of the counselors has helped students understand that part of what your day has to be is time for you. And it may not entail eating a sandwich. You know, if your daughter says, "I'm not hungry at noon," no one's trying to force feed anybody. But everybody should understand that at some point in the day there needs to be a break. And I can tell you, as a professional, and I'm sure the room is filled with professionals, that when we have days that go from 7 to 5 without break, 1, we are ineffective, 2, we are not good parts of a family, and 3, we are not good to ourselves. Our students need to learn that. We're coaching them to be the kind of people who put themselves on a path to, I don't want to be hyperbolic, they put themselves on a path that isn't necessarily aimed where we want our young men and young women to go. As humans, not as professionals or college students, but as people. And I think now is the time when we help our kids understand it's more than just accumulating credits. It's about taking care of ourselves so that we are in this for the long haul. Happiness is down the road, and it's not for right now where we can just pile our days filled with classes. Sorry.
Oh. Go ahead.
You know, I understand the point you're making, and I agree with it 100%, but for some kids, and this is my daughter, that extra elective is her break, and she wants it badly. It is her opportunity to do something fun. It is her opportunity to take that breath. And being forced to be in a group social situation makes her crazy, and she's really unhappy about that. And so I just want to say it isn't just overachieving, it isn't just I need to do this for college. It's this is my chance, maybe forever, to take photography or to take architecture or Greek or whatever.
Thank you. And I wouldn't want to characterize any student as fitting into any small pigeonhole. I don't think that everybody, so 100% I agree, but we'd want to provide support for any student who had that level of discomfort in the large social setting, or for any aspect of this where there's a need for support, we want to make sure that we can provide it. Catherine, go ahead.
Since we're talking about getting the message out, I just wanted to make one observation about the whole, how this might impact the whole college application process, and that is that, you know, the college admissions counselors who are used to Irvington students who might be maxing out their schedule and they're used to seeing a certain number of courses taken each year will now see all of a sudden from Irvington students taking fewer courses. And so I know there is the school report that basically publishes what our curriculum is, what course offerings, so forth. But I would imagine that these college admissions counselors who have been covering Irvington for a decade, they probably don't read the school report anymore because they know Irvington so well that it would behoove us to really send like a red flag to all the colleges and admissions counselors who read our applications that, you know, stop, we've completely changed our curriculum, don't expect, 10 classes anymore from our students. We need, because otherwise the graduating class will look less qualified than the previous year's classes. And so we might look less attractive, but really at no fault to us. So I just want to make sure that the colleges will also be informed of this
And I agree with you, Catherine. And I think there's, certainly a process for that. And while the profile is one place where that can take place, there are other ways for us to be able to communicate with colleges. So I think you bring up a valid point, and certainly one that we've anticipated. And, to make sure that every single college that our students apply to completely understand the programs that our students have access to and what they don't have access to is essential for them to be able to effectively assess and evaluate our students when they're making selection processes.
So David, we spent a lot of time talking about schedules and lunches, and I'm really interested to understand the approach to the teaching aspect, because although I feel like the 77-minute classes are a huge opportunity to lend a deep engagement into a student in a particular subject, I'm just concerned that how the training to get the teachers to teach and think differently about what they do with that time. And, just sort of piggybacking onto what Jane was saying about that this generation is on a much shorter schedule. So understanding within those 77 minutes, you've kind of got to move them through different modules of thinking and acting and doing. And I wonder if the current teachers have any idea about that, because they've gone through formal, perhaps outdated training.
We should be doing that in 42-minute lessons too. We should be creating separate, distinct activities in 42-minute lessons also. So I agree with you. There's a need for training in that, because I don't think that it's necessarily landed for every teacher that these 77-minute blocks need to be. And I don't want to oversimplify with the word chunk, but we've been using that word a lot. They need to be chunked into distinct moments that all serve specific and clear goals for each lesson. So there needs to be an articulation of teachers. There needs to be some support in the development of that, and there needs to be oversight. So as we go forward, that's what our work is, 100%. And I can tell you, as someone who, as a younger teacher, taught in the block for some time, anyone who thinks they can stand in front of a class of students for 70 minutes without providing a variety of experiences is destined for failure.
And creating chunks doesn't just mean, okay, so here's 15 minutes on this topic, step up and down and jump up and down for a minute, and now here's another 15 minutes on another topic. It really is the variety. So, we've been talking with someone who specializes in doing professional development for teaching strategies that help in longer class periods, specifically in if we're going to use the phrase block. And as we've been as we've had a chance to speak with him, a lot of it is putting the teachers in experiences as learners, so they're experiencing those types of things. So he's talked to us about coming in, being able to do an entire day of professional development where he will break it down into 77-minute periods of time for them. And teachers will experience the strategies and a variety of strategies that will work as both examples and models. So it could be something that we call a Socratic seminar, where there's an inner circle and an outer circle, and one group is expected to be talking through one aspect of a question while an outer circle is doing something different, and they potentially reverse roles. Or setting students up in something called jigsaws. Jigsaws is where I may have 4 groups throughout a classroom, and there's 4 distinct different aspects of learning that come together into one bigger understanding. So this group over here is going to learn about component A of that learning. This group is going to learn about component B, component C, and component D. And after they've gone through each of their individual components, you then go back to your home group, and each of the 4 students has to teach the other 3 members of the group those components, while the teacher is serving as a guide and oversight to make sure that the learning is sound. So how we put our teachers into those experiences, not just to talk through it as a philosophy, but actually get them to experience, have them be able to name it. So name that as a jigsaw, name that as a Socratic seminar, so they know now that they have tools that they can tap into, not just theoretically, but in practicality, to make those things happen.
And then just to add one more thought, and to be thoughtful about those choices too. The work that our teachers have been engaged with for the last several years has been around the notion of teaching thinking and creating distinct, nameable goals for each learning experience, whether it's a knowledge goal or a skill goal, a meaning-making goal or a transfer goal. Teachers need to come to understand what the difference is between a 42-minute and a 77-minute lesson is by what kind of goals they can accomplish in those lessons. So where a knowledge goal, an outcome where a student should walk out with the accumulation of some facts they didn't have when they walked in might be something that's easily achieved in 42 minutes. It would be an inappropriate goal for a 77-minute to try to just dump information over that time. That's a prime time to establish some of the meaning making that we're trying to see our students do. And we see that in all of our curricula, whether it's the work that we do with BARD or Metamorphosis or the work that we do with Greg Duncan. All of our teachers for the last several years have been formatting and finalizing documents that really speak into the elements of each unit, so that now we can be thoughtful about how we actually execute those goals, how we actually go after them and align them with the parameters of the lessons that we're building for them.
Just two questions. One, has anybody ever tried this? I mean, is this other school districts doing this, and how did it work out for them?
So there's been, first of all, there have been schools that have been operating under block models or different types of master schedule models for decades. So one of the schools that we visited was Suffern High School, and they have a unit lunch and a model that has periods longer than ours, and they've had it in place, I think they said it was 25 to 30 years. So this isn't something that just started. That being said, there has been a lot of focus and a lot of changes that have gone on. So Hastings has a pure block schedule. I think their periods are roughly 80 minutes in length or close to it. They've been operating under that schedule for a number of years. And I know that Ardsley is in conversation about talking about change. And I know there are other neighboring districts that have been talking about potential change. Croton has a model that is not all that dissimilar from the one that we're talking about here, where they have a series of days that are more traditional towards 42 minutes and other days that are blocks, lengths that are closer to 77 or 80-minute lessons. So certainly I don't think that we are creating something that is new in terms of the concept of changing a master schedule to fit what could be a maximized learning experience and cultural experience for students. That being said, we obviously made tweaks and put together a proposed model that we really think best suits our community and our culture.
Can you remind me, I want to make sure I know this, the IE class, the IE period is a series of a set of choices each day, and a kid can choose one or not, or he has to take one of them. But if the list is correct, one of them is library, which I assume means they go to the library. I know this isn't the finalized list, so do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay, then again, I'm very confused. I spoke to a real academic expert, a real one, someone with a PhD, a master's in education who's devoted his entire life to teaching and developing curriculum at all levels, from elementary all the way through college and everything in between. And he and I both agree that what you have in this kind of a period is a situation where motivated kids, the kids who are losing electives, motivated kids don't need an IE period to seek out a teacher or to go for extra help or to join a club or to do this. And the kids that are not motivated or that are struggling won't take this is not an absolute, but will be less inclined to take advantage of the things that are available, and effectively will just wind up having another study hall. So how can you consider this kind of a program when it's doomed, in my opinion, again, for abject failure?
So again, David, I'm not sure that I can answer the question quite the way you're asking it, but I'm not sure that it's automatically a simple question, but I think that one of the responses, because I think what I'm hearing is an underlying question is, what's the accountability structure? How do we make sure that if we build a model that we think on paper or philosophically could be good for students, that in actuality they're actually taking advantage of those opportunities, whether it's intervention or whether it's enrichment. And by the way, I would say that even our top performing students at times can benefit from either working with a partner, whether it's another peer outside of their classroom, and or seeking the support of a teacher. And I think that's a further structure we have to keep in mind, whether it's an attendance factor. I think, one of the things we've heard from parents, and Vidu, I think you've done an excellent job of bringing it up, what's the data, what's the evaluation structure that we're going to have around this? How are we going to be able to collect and look at data around what choices students are making and how they're taking advantage of it, the ability to recognize where students are using it as a free period. And by the way, that wouldn't necessarily always be wrong, but if we're seeing great masses of students use it as a free period and as quote-unquote a study hall, then that certainly could indicate for us that there could be issues with it. But certainly if we build a thoughtful structure and if we build an accountability structure that helps students find the right place and get them in there and let them know that there's an expectation that they're utilizing it, we've been to schools and we've seen IE be very successful in other models.
I'd say also I think we make a mistake to align motivation with the number of courses that a student signs up for. Yeah. So I'm not hearing, just to clarify. So I think we have plenty of students who take less than the full block of 10 periods who are, very motivated to be successful, but who need opportunities to express that motivation in other ways. So some of the things that really make our school exciting for our students that we envision growing are those clubs and experiences that come out of IE. Some of the things that we're most proud of in our students who might not jump off the page as being our most successful academics are the things they can achieve in our community for each other and for the people around them through their club work, and we want to make that part of our culture. We think that the IE period is a prime place for that. I use clubs only as an example for how.
Well, I have a question about the primary stakeholders. We talked about administrators, parents, teachers, students. It's just curious, it's just a question, is what is your plan? And I'm hearing from lots of people, they are scared. Their cheese is being moved. They are really scared. So what are we doing to prepare them and not prepare them, to rally them to make this a success?
So I think some of it is mirroring the same process that we're starting to go through as the adults right now. So one of the things that happened, we obviously, we had meetings with each of the grades to start talking about the master schedule. And similar to our initial process with parents, a lot of it was information-based. We tried to learn a little bit from our experience with all of you last month, and we built in certainly a little bit more Q&A time, but again, we knew that it was limited. So one of the things that Matt and I had a chance to do was to bring in student council members. We wanted to provide our student leaders with at least one extra layer of involvement right after that process. We met with them from 7 till about 7:45. I think it was 2 days after those assemblies, or maybe it was 3 or 4 days after, but very quickly thereafter. And similar to this, we had an open Q&A session. And the feedback that we received coming out of that was very positive in terms of how being able to talk in those informal sessions and being able to get their thinking out and their questions out really started to shift their understanding of the positives or the possibilities, maybe that's a better word, as well as still some added layers of maybe question and concern that they had. So the ability for us to start to duplicate that, to create opportunities for students to come in during lunches, during before school, during after school, creating a multitude of those experiences so that it allows our students to not have to step out of class, but truly during times when they're free to be able to raise those questions, to engage with us, to be able to talk about it is going to be really important. And then certainly the ability for us to start to engage our students in the next steps. So we need to have subcommittees to build out the IE schedule. We need to have a subcommittee to build out unit lunch, to look at it through cultural experience as well as through the practicality. We need subcommittees to talk about articulation. I talked about it before. And we need to understand student perspective. And for students to be able to be involved in that process to help lead it, I think will not only help those students, but it also help to start to get word of mouth and from student to student to be able to talk about that.
In
In line with what you were just saying, hearing other conversations of kids and knowing kids and based on other context and other questions, how much breaking the barrier of allowing kids to say necessarily what they want to say versus being scared of talking to you as the principal and making sure they're not just giving you the answers you want, but the actual their opinions. And I think that's going to be a hard thing to do to you or their teachers, because they need to have somebody being able to voice their opinions and their thoughts to a completely impartial person who's not member of the authority, because they don't want to come off and oops, they're the ones saying something bad and they're going to look bad to you later on because you're going to be writing their recommendations. But that's the truth. I think that to get an honest opinion of what the kids are saying, you need somebody who's outside of this and outside of the administration that they can feel comfortable talking completely and honestly with about their concerns about this versus that. I like this, I don't, whatever. But I think that needs to be thought out to be able to get an accurate view of kid opinions.
Sure, I think that's a fair point. I also think the idea of knowing that, you know, Matt and I will naturally have some extended relationships with some students versus others. So, you know, it's why we specifically looked at our student council and our student leaders. It wasn't because they're necessarily more deserving of greater access. It's because, you know, actually what we saw was those students came in with their phones, similar to the way I saw parents tonight, and said, so I have a question from another parent. They said, I have a question from another student, and many of them were doing just that. So, you know, Matt kind of alluded to it. One of the beauties of creating these opportunities, there's greater opportunities for leadership, there's greater opportunities for voice, there's greater opportunities for students to exist in some of the very natural ways that exist in our extended cultures. So if we're creating very natural ways for students to represent one another, and for students who might not be comfortable coming to Matt and myself to talk about what they may feel is a tricky process, or that we're going to, you know, somehow look unfavorably upon them because they have questions, we certainly want to give them avenues to be able to go to make sure that their thinking comes through.
And I think that that's very important what you said. It's what I am hearing, and what I think most of us are hearing from our children is an echo chamber of people who really don't know what, haven't delved into this enough to understand it, because from the very first Q&A or the sessions that we had in the auditorium, as a parent, I understood it superficially. It has taken these sessions where we've sat down and broken down the benefits, the pros, the cons that we see, and what the questions and suggestions are, to get a better understanding how this can be an improvement and how it can improve their lives. However, I believe that what's happening with most of these kids is they're just hearing other kids panic because and parents, and I believe mostly parents, panic it because of a lack of understanding of what the depth of this is. And so that's mostly what I think is happening with the kids out there who are, and like I said to somebody in our group last night, you know, the teachers have said, and I said, look, anytime that you have proposed change, the very first thing that you're going to get is 99% are going to oppose it, right? That's the very first thing that happens anytime that you present change, right? Until everybody understands what the change is, then everybody's going to be opposed. But then what is important is that the information and the depth of understanding gets to the kids so that they understand that this might work for them in a very beneficial way, in which will ease their workload at home, those lengthy hours that they spend at home, by using that time more creatively and more productively in an extended period class.
Thank you. You know, and I think the big takeaway that Matt and I have had is, you know, some of our own personal reflection and our own leadership. Certainly, you know, we've stated it with some of the letters that we've sent out to the community, but our understanding of process, you know, our recognition for the importance of an event like tonight to really just be able to put it out there and have good dialogue back and forth. The idea of the tabletops that we set up for yesterday and tomorrow, to be able to even roll up our sleeves and dig in deeper and hear more about the thinking of parents, the ability to engage our students in examples of that, and the ability to expand process is going to be really important. I think you said it well. when information is sort of left dangling, then it's easy for the narrative to take many shapes and sizes, and the ability for us to bring students together and to help not necessarily steer their thinking, but help allow them to ask the questions that they need to hone their own thinking is going to be really important.
So, I mean, we've talked a lot about bringing down the stress for the kids, and this came up in the tabletop last night about the every other day approach with the block, but, I mean, do you foresee that this will decrease the hours they spend on homework?
So theoretically, it absolutely should. I think it's going to be an area that we absolutely have to address and talk through in great detail with our teachers, because if teachers feel that there's a need to keep up with content by doubling up on the amount of homework when they are in 77-minute period days, then there's obviously a potential fatal flaw in the system. So making sure that there's transparency and that we're able to have those conversations and support teachers around what does homework really look like. You know, we've made some efforts at the high school to try to get our teachers to realize that their concept of homework is not always quite as essential as they might feel that it is. We've tried to steer that around some of our breaks and holidays, but being able to dig in a little bit more around what is the purpose of homework, is it the same for all? And while that may feel like you're creating an unfair system, to me, homework has, there's intent of homework. And if it's about just making sure that it's homework for homework's sake, then it may not be best assigned in that manner. So I think there's opportunity for learning around how teachers look at homework.
I just wanted to echo what a lot of people are saying, that I think engagement with the students obviously is very important and something that we all are very concerned about. I also want to expand that in terms of the younger students as well. I have an 8th grader who will be coming in, and I think it's important to engage the middle schoolers who are going to be coming into this, and not leave them out of the process. And also, I would like more information about how this is going to work with the shared campuses. I mean, it's not going to concern my child, obviously, but I am invested in the Irvington district and its success, and I want to see more about how this is going to work with the middle school in terms of just even, basic things like the bells and how the all the high schoolers having lunch at the same time, how that's going to affect the use of the facilities for, with the shared campus, and also aspects like, my son's in Algebra 1. So how is Algebra 1 in 8th grade going to now mesh with Algebra 1 in 9th grade when you have this block schedule, you have a completely different schedule. And I'd also like to know, in future terms, about is there a possibility of actually changing the schedule in the middle school to match the high school, because I think that ideally, long term, whatever schedule we end up with in the high school, I think it's nice to have the same schedule in middle school and high school. So I would like more information and maybe thought about how that's all going to work.
So a couple of things. First, in terms of engagement, we agree and we recognize that. So January 25th is a day where I know it's the regular day to meet with our 8th graders to start talking about high school 9th grade curriculum and decisions that they make. And we've already built into that process a segment where Matt and I will be there and we'll be talking about the changes in the master schedule. It's one step in the process. I don't certainly realize that 8th graders aren't going to fully gather that right away, but it's a first step in engaging them and being able to extend that process. I think you bring up really good questions, and they've come up about the middle school and the impact that the high school schedule has on them. So we're a shared campus. Our schedules don't align every single day as it is right now. So there's already some element of that. We strategically picked the unit lunch periods to minimize, if not eliminate, any overlap with middle school periods. So on the straight 8 days, there would be no overlap at all. As we've highlighted, there is some slight overlap on the block days, and I think the pause gives us some additional time to further look into that. So the last thing I can tell you is I'm here to be able to speak for Mr. Sotile and any potential thinking he has around master schedule. And while it might be great to think logistically that matching the two schedules makes perfect sense, I can tell you that how you may look at instruction and the purpose of a master schedule for a 9 to 12 model is not automatically the same type of model that translates to the most successful of models for middle school students. So I don't know that there would automatically be a plan to purposely align them exactly, but I do think that there's a logistical element to try to minimize any negative impact that one school schedule may have on another. So the ability for Mr. Sotile and I and you know, extended school community to be able to look through that and iron out any kinks to be able to make sure that we're putting those together, I think is going to be really important. So ladies and gentlemen, it's a little after 9. I know we started about 7. I hope and certainly intended to make this feel like we truly are here to answer your questions. We thank you for the opportunity tonight. It felt very much like a discussion, not just you know, a Q&A, and hopefully from your vantage point, it certainly didn't feel like a prepared presentation and an opportunity for us to extend dialogue. So thanks for being here and have a great night. I look forward to advancing the process.
Good luck with midterms. The answer to number 4 is C.